Today's story was written by Reddit user Book for the Worms. Devil Dogs, incorrectly attributed to the German-given nickname of the World War I US Marine. Nevertheless, it has become synonymous with the Marine Corps. Used as nicknames for the Marine Corps itself, the USS Bellewood, and the Quantico Marine football team's mascot. The US Marine Corps, and its later reorganising as a United Earth Special Operations Unit, then United Terran Marine Extra-Planetary Force, have disregarded this truth and have since rebranded themselves as the fabled Teufelshunden that they were originally called. Adorned with the skull and knives patch, the 2nd Marine Force was the first Terran military force, TMF, to see combat with Xeno forces. Excerpt from The Annals of Terran Combat, circa 4578, post-cracking. Nobody was ready. The galactic community hadn't even made contact with them before they attacked. Pushing hard into Zorokian space, thankfully the first few systems were uninhabited, though the automated mining and observation systems were quickly overwhelmed. The aggressors had pushed 5 systems into Zorokian space before they met resistance. It was in an inconsequential system named Rothka 183 that the two forces clashed. An aggressor battle fleet versus part of the 3rd Guard fleet, the rest still scattered around the fleet's sector of operation. The partial Guard fleet stood no chance against the numerically superior battle fleet. However, they were able to get one ship out. This would prove very valuable to the information divisions in the Zorokian and their allies' governments. It was only in the first inhabited system, Angor Prime, that the aggressors were really brought to a stop. By this point, they had taken 9 systems from the Zorokians and several more from the bordering states. It was on Angor Prime, the planet itself, not the system it resided in, that the Zorokians stopped the aggressor movement, as the amassed Zorokian fleets fought the aggressor battle fleets to a standstill in the orbitals. A much bloodier fight was going on its surface. Millions of Zorokians fought against an equal number of aggressor shock troops. Zorokians, small bipedal mammals, were the worst soldiers in terms of physicality. They were smaller than every other galactic community member by a sizable margin, and had less muscle mass than children of some of the larger members. They were instead known for their speed, able to run at the galactically recognised speed limit, a healthy 30 miles an hour, for upwards of 30 minutes. The aggressors outdid them in nearly every category. They were slightly larger than the galactic average, able to lift ground cars with ease, and they had a faster reaction time. Fortunately, the Zorokians weren't only reliant on their physical attributes, they were instead known for their robots and mechanical engineering. It was rumoured that they had even made pseudo-artificial life. Full AI was outlawed before it could even be researched too thoroughly. It was these robots, assisted mobility suits, and advanced weapon systems that allowed the Zorokians to stop the aggressors from taking more than half the planet. A Super Terran Class M. Since both fleets had partial orbital control both sides, ground forces were able to receive reinforcements and supplies, further extending the bloody warfare. It took several long months, and in the case of more pacifist nations, much longer, for armies to be raised and fleets to be built or refurbished. Long enough for severe lines to be set, no entities' lands to be established, orbital air armour defences to be created, and a tense routine to be set. The aggressors were clearly in no rush, and the Zorokians didn't have enough firepower to force them out. All of this combined kept attacks down to probing strikes and sparse shelling, artillery being used more by the aggressors, as the GC ruled artillery too brutal. The first to arrive was a squadron of stealth corvettes from the nearby Thracians, masters of information and surveillance. They evolved from a prey animal that hid in the grass and trees, escaping the view of predators. The Thracian culture and military embodied this, choosing dull colours and were slow to anger, never acting rashly or without thought. The corvettes quickly and stealthily went to work, gathering all they could on the fleets in orbit and troops on the ground. Aggressor EMC proved incredibly strong. But everything gives something away. The Thracian intelligence ops, the best in their field, believed that fleet reinforcements were on the way and that the Xerocians had to act fast. The Xerocian admirals said they didn't have enough ships to have small campaigns, much less commit an extended attack. It wasn't until a Gastic Precision Engagement Vessel, PEV, fleet entered the system that the combined fleet started moving against the aggressors. With the ability to snipe ancillary craft out of the aggressor flotilla with impunity, the danger had lessened enough that the Xerocian High Admiral allowed for an increase in attacks, catching patrols and smaller fleets off guard and then retreating well into the ground to orbit defence coverage that the ground forces were so desperately trying to hold. In response, the aggressors started ramping up attacks all across the planet's surface, trying to wrest control of the batteries away from the defenders. Mass assaults and increased jamming took place all across the planet. The aggressors were pushing hard for those vital points, and it looked like they would get some of them too. It was looking dire for the Ground Combat Council, GCC. They were losing ground heavily. 2 of the orbital batteries had been taken over by the aggressors. However, one had been detonated in the final defence. Unfortunately, this still left one in aggressor hands, and they were working quickly to bring it back online. Another fleet appeared in the system, because they didn't use hyperlanes, but instead warp technology. A line of line the GC had deemed inferior and a waste of time and resources. The Xerocian command was caught off guard and prepared to fire on these unknown vessels. The vessels quickly identified themselves as Terran Quick Reaction Force, QRF, and said they were here to help with the ground combat, scoffing at this claim, as Terrans had only been members of the galactic community for 25 years or so at this point, and hadn't been in any conflicts. The High Admiral nevertheless let them through. "Alrighty boys, we are planetside in 15 mics. Tango is big, dumb and ugly. Friendly is Skynet or those little rat things. Watch your goddamn firing lines. I don't want any blue on green," yelled the NCO. The aggressors were pushing hard for Orbital Denial Battery, Tango, and it was all we could do to hold them off. I remember looking up at the sky and seeing hundreds, thousands of these little glowing specks. It looked like a meteor show back home. God, I miss home. My next thought was orbital fire, or the aggressors' damn long-range cannons. But it was headed in the wrong direction. It was going towards their lines. A runner came by. Most all of the communications networks and channels were down. Though older systems work semi-reliably, we still leaned heavily on these messengers. He said something along the lines of, "Friendly inbound, don't shoot 'em down. We need 'em alive, yeah?" How he managed to joke around at a time like this was beyond my comprehension, but I cracked a smile anyways. Looking back up, I could see they were closer. They were slightly larger blobs of fire. Then all as one, the fire disappeared and they were grey orbs. I kept watch on them, while throwing out potshots, seeing them grow bigger and bigger. I could now tell for sure they weren't going to hit us. Sorry, bastards. Landing right in the middle of the aggressor formation would surely decimate their numbers, if not more, before we could do anything to help. Faithful always they shall remain, dogs to lose when war is waged, screamed from the sky. The boom of impact could be heard all the way across the valley to where I was. Plasma fire cut off almost immediately, as hundreds of thousands of smaller explosions could be heard across the valley. "Sorry we're late, chaps. Took a wrong turn near Casa Bali. Hope we didn't miss too much fun," came from the, apparently, now working comms units. Memoirs of the Angkor Prime Assault, Chapter 2, Battle for Hinsgone Valley. Unknown to the ground commanders at the time, the Terran 2nd Marine Force, 2MF, was landing in key spots around the planet. 1,050,000 soldiers, along with their supporting equipment, were in the system, with the Orbital Dropship Divisions, ODDs, landing first, nearly 300,000 men strong. Landing hard-boiled, under fire and without care for surroundings when landing, the dropships burnt the terrain nearly 150 feet away from the thrusters that were fighting hard to slow the massive vehicles to a comfy 40 feet per second. The craft hit the ground hard, sinking into the rocky terrain, and deployed 20mm autocannons and erased all lifeforms within sightlines. Thankfully, some quick thinking on the Ground Combat Council's part made sure that they weren't accidentally firing into the backs of their unknown allies. Not all combat units received the message, however, due to aggressor jamming, resulting in Zorokian forces firing on TMF troops and several Terrans responding with, quote, "fuck you," and then carrying about their duties, the plasma fire not making it through the incoming fire suppression rings. The TMF quickly set up FOBs and advanced bases at the now cleared LZs, working quickly so that the heavier divisions could land and begin operations. Most notably was the defence of Hill 156, known locally as the Jackspat Park for smaller offspring. Here, the 12th ODD forced back an aggressor armoured division that was pushing on a civilian shelter, taking heavy casualties in the process. With FOBs and advanced bases set up, the TMF armour and infantry divisions were able to land. Better equipped for extended engagements, the infantry moved out and retook huge swaths of land before the aggressors could react, while the armoured formed spearheads against whatever enemy armour or fortifications were in place. Similar to the ODD and infantry divisions, ID, TMF armour divisions, AD, carry 15,000 men in each division, though instead of 3 infantry or orbital dropship trooper brigades, they hold 2 armoured divisions and an interim armoured vehicle, IAV, brigade. Both division types came with artillery, combat aviation, engineer, protection and sustainment brigades, allowing them to be independent fighting forces all by themselves. Using the armour, the Terrans broke the aggressor line in 3 places. The 3rd AD, can openers, were able to push through the heavy woods near the city of Thurgan Enclave. Trees hundreds of years old, torn from the ground and smashed by the heavy fighting. The 7th AD, Fat Darlin, was known for taking up positions on the friendly side of Karshan Pass and lobbed indirect fire at aggressor forces with the help of their stealth reconnaissance planes. The 10th AD, Terra's Might, pushed the farthest. Landing near the Zephyrin Fields, massive sparsely wooded plains, they overran any and all resistance, making it 20 miles into the aggressor's sides until they stopped and waited for the 5th and 23rd Infantry Divisions to reinforce and help hold the territory. The Terran landing was the beginning of the end for the aggressor invasion, as communications between the newly arrived 2nd Marine Force, Rocky Top, and the more relaxed Ground Combat Council were made and misunderstandings cleared up. Troops from both sides met and mingled. Translator programs were straightened out, and morale rose to higher than it was pre-invasion. The aggressors, still reeling from the Terran lightning warfare tactics, let the combined Terran-Zorokian forces restructure and move around troops, as they too pulled back into more defensible terrain and made fortified fighting positions. By the end of the week, all of the 2MF was on the ground, including the 3 super heavy armoured divisions, SHAD. Zorokian forces stood, shocked, as the first SHAD, no-fly zone, landed and began operations, the 15 massive planetary resupply redeployment and indirect fire denial systems were designed to lock down entire hemispheres. The second SHAD, Pop Goes the Weasel, was no less impressive with its 10 inner and outer orbital denial systems, designed to knock starships up to cruiser class out of combat. However, the third SHAD, One for You and One for You, drew the most looks. The Planetary Command and Resource Allocation Center, PCRAC, just looked like a large warehouse, when in actuality it had the most important job. It mined the deep crust for resources and controlled units from all branches throughout the entire system. What do you mean? They must fall under our command. It's my damn planet. Do they know how to fight with allies, or are they only capable of slamming their face into a wall? Screamed General Vasquez. As one of the GCC and one of the 3 5-leaf generals on the planet, he was enraged that these Terrans, newcomers and therefore nobodies in the eyes of the galactic community, would dare defy his orders. He had been leading ground armies for decades, well before the Terrans had even known about the GC. Give me a communicator. I will force these primitives to follow my orders myself, if I have to. General Crowley, 2nd Marine Force, Rocky Top, Commander speaking. How may I be of assistance? I am a little busy, make it quick, replied a voice through the speaker. Other voices and what sounded like construction or explosions came through the comms with it. Sneering at the apparent lack of sophistication and unprofessionalism, Vasquez said, "You are being put with the depleted 2nd Army. Your commander is..." Click. The communicator was dead in his hands. The aide that handed the general the communicator backed away even further than he already was, as the general looked ready to explode. Another aide walked in. "Terran Command sends their regards and a message." He handed it to one of the general's personal aides and left the room. Vasquez still hadn't moved, the communicator still against his ear. The rest of the council looked over the message, and the discussion brought the still livid general back to his senses. Looking at the message, however, had him cursing the Terrans with words that made the council send him to his quarters. Terran soldiers fight under Terran Command, who answer to the Terran Combined Nations, none other. Memento Terra. Initial tensions and problems aside, GCC and Terran forces started working closely together to push back the aggressor menace, using the Terran's superior, much to the chagrin of General Vasquez, military and tactical network and information systems, most notably the near-live updates placed onto holotables in Terran and eventually GCC headquarters. The combined forces gradually integrated fighting areas. Neither side commanded the other's forces, leading to several heated debates when Terran forces refused to alter plans unless orders were given straight from Terra Planetary Command. Differing objectives also played a factor, as Terran forces were much more likely to disregard potential civilian casualties and future repopulation efforts in their attempt to uproot the enemy from century-old cities. Eventually, however, the full 70 Division TMF was deployed and sent into battle, letting GCC forces to redeploy elsewhere. This became known as the Proving Grounds amongst Terran Command, and it showed them what worked and what didn't. It was a time of doctrine changes and equipment modifications. Within months, the Specialists Underground had made modifications to weapons, equipment, and armour so they could better carry out their job. As much of a test of Terrans for Terrans, it was more so a test by the GCC, a test to see how their untested allies would fare in a real war. However, the aggressors proved to be almost laughably underwhelming compared to what the 2nd Marine Force was used to. With weaker armour on their tanks than the bare APC, and air support was slightly better than the drone squads would use for reconnaissance, the 2nd Marine Force rolled through the aggressor forces in their AO, which quickly grew to be the entire continent of Morgovia. A campaign that, if carried out on Ruinterra, would have started in former France and ended in the bay separating the former nations of China and Japan, and spanned just as wide, if not wider than the landmass it had been hypothetically carried out on. Upon hearing and seeing the complete ease the 2nd MF had in their operations, Terran Zeno Affairs Military Command gave the green light for the release of Army TMFs and more Marine TMFs to be transferred into active combat roles, as well as several Space Command Armada fleets to leave Terran and uncontrolled space. The war with the aggressors had only just begun, and the Terran military beast was only just waking up, a beast that was better left sleeping, and never to be poked, not even with a several light-year long stick. Memento Terra.